Welcome to the Bluestocking Circle podcast, Lady Nerds on Popular Culture. We're your hosts, Griselle,
Ashley, and B.
This is episode 16, Bridget Jones's Diary. First off, welcome to my secret feminist agenda. I'm here to break down stereotypes and challenge internalized misogyny regarding books by and about women. Note, I didn't say women's fiction because gendering writing is a nonsense thing and I call shenanigans on that. Today we will be discussing Bridget Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding, the first book in the Bridget Jones series about that iconic 30-something singleton living in London. This episode will focus on the book rather than the films, but discussion of female representation in film is always welcome and may arise throughout the episode. Whether you've read the books or seen the films, you probably know or think you know Bridget. However, if you've managed to avoid this pop culture icon and would like to remain spoiler-free, go read the book now. For the rest of you, deep breaths, inner poise, and no jellyfishing. Be good. Published in 1996, Bridget Jones's Diary is considered the ur-text of chick lit, or, as we now call it, women's fiction. I say this with major eye-rolling. Despite its near-instant success, the mere mention of Bridget is sure to induce criticism regarding the literary merit of such works. More often than not, this is a critique of women's writing and the works consumed by women. While Bridget Jones does not suffer the same level of scorn associated with the romance genre, the novel's concern with issues related to women's experience, in this case, white, cisgendered experience, often inspires subtle and not so subtle misogyny. So here's my secret feminist agenda. I'd like to dismantle that kind of thinking and look at the work as part of the canon of 90s fiction. As Elizabeth Bleek, in a 1998 New York Times review titled If We Find Mess, writes, "It would be a shame to spend too much time searching for meaning in a book that's this much fun to zip through. But people will be passing around copies of Bridget Jones's Diary for a reason. It captures neatly the way modern women teeter between I am woman independence and a pathetic girly desire to be all things to all men. But, as Bridget tells her diary, I am a child of cosmopolitan culture, have been traumatized by supermodels and too many quizzes, and know that neither my personality nor my body is up to it if left to its own devices. I can't take the pressure." Bridget captures a particular moment that resonates with many women. Fielding pokes fun at the idea that we have to be all things at all times. Look a certain way, act a certain way, be at the top of our game, whatever that game may be. I like to think we're seeing a move away from this kind of thinking, but breaking up with societal expectations is hard. As I mentioned in Minisode 15.5, like Mary and Sherlock, Bridget was born in the pages of a newspaper, in this case The Independent, when then-journalist Helen Fielding was offered the chance to write a weekly column about urban life in London designed to appeal to young professional women. Fielding accepted, and Bridget Jones was born on February 28, 1995. The column ran until 1997, when it was picked up by the Daily Telegraph, running until 1998. Its popularity led to the publication of the first book, followed by The Edge of Reason in 1998. Fielding revisited the column in 2005 for a series of entries that would later become Bridget Jones's Baby. Side note, the movie of the same name is loosely based on this series, closing with the third novel, Mad About the Boy, in 2013. Bridget may not be perfect, but I hope there is something to be learned from her antics. But first, B will tell us what book Bridget is about.
Bridget Jones's Diary is a diary of Bridget Jones, recounting a calendar year in her life during which she continuously worries about her weight, cigarette and alcohol consumption, and relationship status because she is, horror of horrors, a single woman in her early 30s. She obsesses over her smarmy boss for most of the year, dates him, realizes long after everyone else what a terrible idea that is, then ends up with a rich guy literally named Mr. Darcy. Let the record show she is a well-to-do woman weighing in the vicinity of 120 pounds, surrounded by people who for some reason adore her, and who has a cushy job in the field of book publishing, then in TV, as well as her own flat in London and no student loans as far as we know, plus she ends up dating every guy she sets her sights on, including Mr. Darcy himself, yet she nonetheless spends the entire year wallowing in self-doubt and self-pity.
That's a pretty good assessment. I would say that about sums it up. But I think we can all relate to feelings of self-doubt. So let's dive into our origin stories and hopefully I'll explain why I am so into this story. For myself, I found Bridget when I was an incredibly awkward 15-year-old riddled with feelings of self-doubt and self-pity, as Bridget is throughout the story, and I was certain I would be a tragic spinster. I had a very complicated relationship with my body, and still do if I'm being completely honest, and I was desperate to find someone like me in fiction. That's when I found Bridget. And with Bridget, I then found Lizzie Bennet, Anne Elliot, Mia Thermopolis, Georgia Nicholson, and many more. So let's just say Helen Fielding was my gateway to books by and about women. I've read Bridget as many times as Pride and Prejudice, and while the book is certainly starting to show its mid-90s age, I can still relate.
I too was certain I would be a tragic spinster when I was 15. So I relate to that part of the story. I think I was in college when I found Bridget. I was on a Jane Austen-inspired kick, and when I read that the story was loosely based on Pride and Prejudice, I was like, why not? I'd already seen the Bollywood-inspired film Bride and Prejudice. If you haven't seen it, don't. My expectations didn't have a very high bar to jump, so I went in hoping to be pleased by it.
We are very different people because when I was 15, I was hoping I would be a non-tragic spinster. I saw this movie sometime after college when I caught it on TV one lazy day. I started watching it with no preconceived notions, knowing nothing about it, not even that it was a riff on Pride and Prejudice, except for a vague recollection that Renee Zellweger had gained weight for the role and the media had made a really big deal out of it. I ended watching the movie consumed with loathing for every character, and I figured I would never have to read or watch anything about these people ever again, and yet... Earlier this year, you said you wanted to do an episode on the book or so, and you did not change your mind despite my not-so-subtle pleas to pick literally anything else in the universe, so here we are.
I will say, in my defense, that I offered an alternative and it was denied.
Your alternative literally had snogging in the title.
It's funny and will make you laugh out loud. It's the one book I cannot read in public. But I am overall convinced that B just felt sorry for my constant pleading and gave in during a moment of weakness.
I figured you were never going to let this go, so we might as well just get it over with.
That's a good enough way to go about it. Okay, so before we get into what I'm sure will turn into a very lively conversation, any general discussion we'd like to have?
I have a question, not about the book, but about you.
About me?
About you. I am fascinated by how people see themselves versus how other people see them. And we mentioned it during the last episode a little bit, but this time, as I was reading the book, I kept remembering that you called Bridget your literary soulmate, and I don't see it at all. If I thought you were anything like this, I would not willingly spend any time with you. So I'm really curious, what is it about Bridget that makes you see yourself in her?
That's actually a pretty good question. I would say that, as you noticed, there is a difference between how people see themselves and how other people see them. And that's actually kind of a theme in the book as well. I, especially at 15, felt very much like a Bridget. I was always afraid that I was kind of foolish and utterly incapable of stringing two sentences together. I was a little bit hopeless at everything. Like, my life felt a little bit out of control. Everything was kind of just falling to pieces in the way that, being 15 makes everything seem 10 times worse. But even as I grew older and continued to read Bridget, there were still parts of her character that resonated with me. Her weight being 120 pounds and all that notwithstanding, I myself had issues with my weight, and her struggle just resonated with me. Whether or not it was exactly like mine, I found a lot in her character that reminded me of my own struggles, and the overall message, especially as you get through the book and the way her friends react to her and their perception of her, Mark Darcy's perception of her, how everybody kind of sees her as being way more together than she thinks she is kind of one of the things that I think resonated with me and made me kind of relate to Bridget. So I do still think of her as like my kindred spirit in the literary world, and sometimes I am my own Bridget.
I do want to say, talking about her weight being around 120 pounds, the first time I read it through, I was like, oh, she's so skinny. What is she complaining about? And then when I was kind of flipping through it again in preparation for this episode, then I started thinking, you know what? That's not really fair of me. I'm not 120 pounds. I would love to be that skinny, on some days. But I know that women who are skinnier than I am still have their own body and self-image issues. So yes, she might be 120 pounds, but she's not happy with herself. I was actually put in mind of something that Louise Brealey, who was an actress on Sherlock, she played Molly Hooper. She was in a production of something, I can't remember what, and she had to be nude for it. And she had a lot of issues about it, and she remembers vividly her friends saying, but Louise, you're so thin, why are you complaining? Like almost kind of negating her issues about acting in the nude. And she said in the interview, no, that yes, I'm a skinny person, but that doesn't mean that I'm 100% happy with my body. So in defense of Bridget, I think that's an interesting point that yes, she's not happy and we're looking at her from the outside because we're not her, but she has an issue with it.
And I think that's the big takeaway of the book. And for myself in particular, I know that the weight is like the elephant in the room for a lot of people because you jump to that conclusion of like, oh, 120 pounds is nothing. I don't want to go too into like my personal history, but my lowest weight ever, which is not my weight now, was pretty close to 120 pounds. And I never felt like I looked good. So I can relate to that in that way. So always the assumption of, well, you look great. We're always harder on ourselves than we are on anybody else. And I think Bridget is definitely harder on herself than any of her friends are on her, except maybe Shazzer.
I feel like everyone needs a Shazzer in their lives.
Yes.
Just to kind of bring that, like...
to, like, smack you back into reality.
Yes, when you need it.
I am the Shazzer in everyone's life.
There you go. Maybe that's why you don't like the book, because you just want to smack Bridget and you can't.
Accurate.
There you go. So let's dive right into ship wars. And get this battle royale going, I suppose. So obviously, we know Daniel is bad, Mark is good, our one true ship is Bridget and Mark, but I'd like us to look beyond the main ship of the story and think of maybe some of the alternative relationships in the book. One of the things that I love about Bridget in particular is her relationship with her friends and how they play off of each other. And then there's Bridget and her parents, especially her mom, who is a little zany and weird, but as I grow older, I find that I can relate more and more to Bridget and her mother's relationship. Generally overwhelmed and often exasperated, but her mom is always right. Any thoughts?
Before we begin discussing other ships, as it were, I want it on the record that I actually do not like Bridget and Mark together. Or rather, if I'm going to be accurate, they don't spend that much time together at all in the book, so I don't understand how Mark is so attracted to Bridget. It seems as if it's clearly not a love at first sight thing to me, especially from Bridget's side, so what in their limited interactions endeared her to him?
It's your other favorite trope, Ashley. Childhood sweethearts.
But like not really, right?
No,
Just
not
because
really,
they
not at
paddled
all.
around in like the kiddie pool when they were naked or something. When
She
they were
doesn't
7.
remember him at all. It's just her mom constantly going like, you knew this guy. And she's like, I have no idea who you're talking about. It's like every time my mother's like, remember Fulanito, the one who lived down the road? And I'm like, I have no idea who you're talking about.
Do we need to define Fulanito?
I think it works the way it is. People will figure it out through context.
Try that on Google Translate.
But yeah, you know what I mean? Like, why does Mark like her?
Why does anyone like her?
B is Shazzer again. So I would respond to that from two angles. One, the movie ends up spending a lot of time building that because it's not in the book. So a lot of people who have only ever seen the movie always think that it's, as B was afraid, like a love triangle book, like it's all about the romance. The book is mostly just about Bridget, so it's whatever experience she has. And she doesn't have that much time with Mark.
Right.
Like, they rarely see each other. It's only through infrequent interactions that they start to get to know each other. But it's in those infrequent interactions, especially towards the latter half of the book, when he starts to be the Darcy of Pride and Prejudice, like the one who comes in and like saves the day. Her mother is the Lydia Bennet of this book. So he comes around and saves her from this like horrible, weird insurance vacation home scheme that she got dragged into with her Portuguese lover that they ran off with. So he is the one who is the hero of the book, and Bridget starts to see that he's not the kind of like boring, sterile guy that she thought he was, especially because her parents keep pushing. Well, not her dad, but her mom and her mom's friend Una keep pushing him on her. And she's like, I don't want to know this guy. I don't really have anything to do with this guy. And, you know, then she does see his house. So there is that too.
I mean, I guess. I just think that in Pride and Prejudice, Darcy and Lizzie spend that week together at Netherfield, and then he sees her when she's at the Collinses, I forget what their parsonage is called, but with the Collins by Rosings. So I feel like in Pride and Prejudice, he sees more of her, so even though she's being a total brat to him, for whatever reason, he's turned on by people being brats to him, he falls for Lizzie. I didn't really see that here.
I think, obviously, you know, things being 20th century as opposed to 18th century with Pride and Prejudice, it's more a matter of the fact that these are two people who live in the city, and because Bridget is so much about, like, what do you do when you're a girl in the city in your 30s, like, trying to find someone? It's more of that, like, natural attraction to each other as opposed to, like, hot spark thing, and Bridget kind of just starts to be like, hey, maybe I should give this guy a chance. They do have a lot more interactions in the second book, so if you think of it as a duology as opposed to a trilogy, because there is a tragic turn in the trilogy, those first two books build upon each other. The second book is based more on persuasion, but there is more of her really getting to know Mark. And then they're like, I don't know if this is all that I thought it was going to be and why they should stay together.
Okay, so if I look at it as if this is not the fairy tale ending at
Right.
the end of it, it's just after the first or second date at that part in the relationship, and the rest of the story is the rest of their relationship.
Exactly. They're just starting to get to know each other. They're not like falling head over ears. They're not going to get married at the end of the book.
Okay.
Was this planned as a series, or was this planned as a standalone book?
It used to be a serialized collection of stories. So they were originally just a serialized collection, and then they were eventually like turned into 1 year in the life. And then when this one became so popular, book 2 was bought. So I imagine, I mean, I don't know the way that she did her book deal. Usually when you do a book deal, you propose a sequel. So there was probably some idea that there was a proposed sequel. And I could just be jumping to conclusions because I don't know the full history of how she did that. I did see an author talk with her when the third book came out. She just kind of wanted to come back to Bridget, and big spoiler, because I don't think any of you are going to be reading it, but spoiler for the audience.
I know this.
Mark is dead. At the author talk, she mentioned that she wanted to write Bridget again from a fresh perspective of being in the dating scene. At that point, she's got children, so it was a widow story. And she was like, Mark would never cheat on Bridget, so I can't have that be the story. So she ended up making her a widow so that she could date another guy.
I remember that kerfuffle. I remember how furious all the fans were.
It was a really good book, to be honest. I like the book as it is. It's very different from the other two books. It's a lot more mature. And it doesn't have any of the Jane Austen elements.
My gut reaction is to say, why can't authors know when to leave well enough alone? Since I have not read the second and third one.
Ditto.
I will reserve judgment because, like you said, it's a good story and fine, okay. I will circle back to something else you said. In regards to Bridget's relationship with her mother, I actually hated it. This is because, A, I hated the mom, who I don't remember being that horrible to Bridget and to the dad and to everyone in the movie. I could be wrong.
Not. They tamped that down a lot in the movie.
Okay, so then she's horrible.
I think in the movie they play up Daniel and they downplay her mom.
Yes, that seems more in line with what I remember. So she's horrible. And I didn't get her relationship with her mom, I think because I'm not someone who's afraid to tell her mother what she thinks and who's very used to disagreeing with her mother because we have very different personalities. I love her, but she and I think very differently. And we've come to the point where I just do what I want and she does what she wants. So I don't get this Bridget's an adult and she can't tell her mom that she doesn't want to get her colors done or whatever nonsense it was.
So the way I interpret it is not so much that Bridget is afraid to say no to her mom, but just that she knows through years of experience that even if she does, her mom will not stop.
Kind of like when your friend makes you read a book that she knows you will hate.
Exactly so. Stop. They will wear you down.
I don't know. I'm still not really sold on the mom. I am sold on the friends. I really liked Bridget's relationship with her friends. I thought it was really accurate how she has some friends that she can tell things to, certain things, and other friends to whom she can't tell things to. And this is because she knows the reaction. So it's kind of like, when you want a particular type of advice, you know which friend to go to. If you want the person to say, yes, do it, or no, don't do it, you kind of pick what you want to hear. That was really real life to me. So yeah, I really think that her having friends that she knows she can go to for certain things, it's just really real life. That struck home. That was actually a part where I started laughing out loud. So I was like, oh yeah, I've done that. It never works out, because you know that the advice you're getting is not the real advice, but you do it anyway.
You know exactly who you need to go to make you feel better and just kind of agree with whatever it is you're trying to say in the first place, and then they just back it up because that's the friend.
The part where she said, oh, you know what? My friends told me that it's my birthday, so I can invite whoever I want, and they all start telling her that they want to invite this person and that person, and Bridget's like, you guys, also very real life.
Yes.
Speaking of laughing out loud, there was one thing and only one thing in this book that actually made me laugh out loud, and that was when she described shipping. Do you remember that part? I wrote down the quote because it was so funny. She wrote, slightly condensed for time, Darcy and Elizabeth are my chosen representatives in the field of courtship, which I thought was a really funny way of putting it. And I also laughed at how she added, quote, I do not, however, wish to see any actual goals. I would hate to see Darcy and Elizabeth in bed. That would be unnatural and wrong, end quote. And I laughed because my friends and I went through those Pride and Prejudice published fanfic books back in the day, like Mr. Darcy's Daughters and Mr. Darcy Takes a Wife and whatnot, and they were indeed unnatural and wrong.
My heart melts a little to know that you laughed one time.
But no, I have Mr. Darcy Takes a Wife. I think my mom bought it for me at a book sale because she saw Mr. Darcy.
I think we all tried to read that book at one point.
I never made it to the end.
I didn't make it to the end either, to be honest.
I was like, no, this is not what happens. They don't have carnal relations. They just hold each other's hands, and that's it.
One really awkward kiss at the end, and then the story.
And nothing.
And speaking of things that are unnatural and wrong, dating your boss. This trope has always bothered me, the employer-employee or professor-student relationship that's so common in these types of stories. I'm really glad it's going away in this era because power imbalance in a relationship is not sexy. Even if Daniel was the nicest guy in the universe, which obviously he's not, I would still hate it. It's not really consensual if one person in the relationship has the power to fail or to fire the other one.
I did wonder if that was something that would fly if the book was being published today.
I will concede that it is a problematic thing in the story. I, however, have never had a problem with it in this particular portrayal. I never got the sense that, despite being, what he is, Daniel ever implied that he would fire her or anything like that. The romance was mostly covered up, that nobody in the office really knew about it.
Yes, they did. They knew about it. They were just not saying it out loud. They were not being subtle. At the end when they break up, it's obvious that everyone in the office knew what was going on.
Well, at the end, yeah, because at that point, she's kind of moping around and they all know something, but I wouldn't say that it ever was overtly sexual in the office.
I don't think it was overtly sexual for someone else looking at it from the outside, because I think most of it was like over, not G-Chat, whatever the office communicator was in 1990s London.
AIM.
In the movie, it's AIM. In the book, I think it's like an internal thing.
Oh, the memories. But I do agree with B. The office romance, I think, has to be done very carefully.
I don't mind the office romance part, like Lois Lane and Clark Kent, that's an office romance, but they're both colleagues. They're at the same level. It's the boss dating their employee. That's really skeevy.
Maybe that's what it is, because I actually know people in real life who are married and work together in the same department.
My parents. I am here because of an office romance.
And that's perfectly fine. Like, as the outsider looking at it, I haven't had a problem, but I do think I would have a problem if I saw that my boss was dating, male or female, not necessarily that it's the man is the boss and the woman is the employee. Either way, my boss dating someone who works for them, I think I have an issue with, because maybe this is my background as an attorney. Someone's going to sue someone because either you get upset because you didn't get the promotion, or someone else gets upset because you didn't get the promotion. It just seems like a lot of trouble. Like, Bridget seems to know what she's doing. I don't think Daniel was taking advantage of her. He was, but not in the office sense. Like, he wasn't having her, I don't know, stay after and doing more work. She didn't seem to do the work she needed to do in the first place. It just did not seem...
Yeah, and I can't say that, at least in my reading, that Daniel ever pulls rank or power over her. Right. So that's why I never really had a problem with it. It almost seems like they happen to be working in this place, but the relationship has nothing to do with the job they do.
I want to see the diary of the HR person watching all this unfold.
I always feel like Bridget is more scared of Perpetua as her direct boss than she ever is of Daniel as like the CEO of the company or whatever it is that he does within the publishing organization.
And it puts Perpetua in a really uncomfortable position as well. Because if she scolds her employee for not doing any work whatsoever, then her boss is going to scold her for scolding this person that he's dating. It's just really awkward all around, and I did not care for it.
But do we care if Perpetua is in an awkward position? Because she seemed to be kind of mean.
Yeah, Perpetua's very, classist, so...
Yeah, so it's almost like, I don't care, which is not fair, because anyone in the position would, I think, be in a comfortable one. But I was kind of like, ugh, whatever, your problem, you deal with it.
I think it's also a product of its time, sadly. So that is that. Like with so many books that we read now, and we look back and we're like, I don't know if that would fly today, but it is what it is. I never had a real problem with it, to be honest. So I think we have started ranting, so let's just go straight into feminist rant. Let's do this. Given that this whole episode is technically my feminist rant, I will forego any planned ranting and say that while I don't think the book is perfect, as I just admitted, I do think it deserves a place in the canon of contemporary fiction. And I would also like to give it praise for paving the way for a whole generation of diary novels that were not really a thing before this book came around.
No, I'm trying to think. I don't know that I have a ton of feminist rants. I actually have a feminist anti-rant, and it kind of ties back to what we were talking about before. Reading it, I really enjoyed having a female protagonist who, whether or not she actually is a hot mess, as we discussed from people looking at her, is someone who felt that she was a hot mess. And we can agree. She fails in her desire to give up smoking, and she fails in her desire to eat healthily, because whether or not she weighs 120 or 150 or 110 pounds, the eating has to be a little, we need to get her away from the emotional eating. I understand.
I think we do. We all do.
Someone who she dates emotional idiots, and her dating life is a hot mess because she cannot see that the person she's a crush on is a horrible, horrible person to have a crush on, although everyone else can. So her internal life is kind of a hot mess. And I appreciated seeing that because so many times women have to be perfect. They have to be Mary Sue's, or they have to be the saviors. They have to be very specific cookie cutter characters. And I know that there are many characters now that are hot messes and kind of owe it to Bridget, but I did enjoy reading one of the first ones.
Well, I was ready for some serious ranting, so I'm still waiting for some pushback, please.
I'm in an odd position here because I reacted very negatively to this character. What I think about Bridget is basically what you thought about Book Mary Poppins last episode, Ashley. Do you remember what you said?
There's nothing likable about her?
And she doesn't do anything, and she doesn't appeal to me in any way. And yet, I kind of don't want to say that because I know how much she means to you, Grisel, and I know that you identify with her, and I don't want to insult this character because I feel like by proxy, I would be being mean to you in some way, and I don't want to do that.
Well, I think criticism is fine. I don't think it's a personal attack to me if you dislike a character that I like, because I understand that everybody likes different things. And kind of like how Ashley was able to express her feelings on Mary Poppins, I don't think it's a bad thing to not all like the same things and to have different opinions.
But I don't like book Mary Poppins either, so that was a different situation.
What?
I respect her and I can admire her for what she is and who she is, and yet I have no strong feelings about her either way, and I know that's not the case for you here, which is why I don't really want to bring up any of these things that I'm thinking. But I am going to bring up something in particular, and that's the not like other girls trope, which came into play in this book. Mark said to Bridget, I wrote it down, Bridget, all the other girls I know are so lacquered over, implying that you're not like them, you're very different, you are not like the other girls. This is a trope so well known that it's actually in TV tropes, where they state, quote, however it's meant, this line can be interpreted as a backhanded compliment. Whatever makes you different from the other girls, it's implied that the rest of your gender, and I'm going to paraphrase here, is no good. Did you pick up on that?
I did. My first instinct was to think that Helen Fielding was actually kind of pushing back and making Mark not perfect, because by him telling Bridget all the other girls I know are so lacquered over, he's saying that all the other girls he knows are polished and Bridget is not polished, which is kind of why I didn't understand why he liked her, unless it was because she was different and he enjoys the different. And then I thought maybe she's trying to show that even Mr. Darcy, the Mr. Darcy, is not a perfect person, because in relationships there are no perfect people. And then I circled back to, I do hate the not like other girls trope, because what are other girls? Like, why does one girl have to be emblematic of the entire gender? So I had a lot of thoughts that were kind of seesawing.
I can agree. It is a trope that gets to be annoying, especially because so often I see it portrayed in films as like, you know, the one girl who maybe doesn't wear makeup, has frizzy hair, and is a little awkward, and suddenly the football player at the end of the movie is like, you were wonderful all this time because you're not like other girls. And that is annoying. It's just terrible. I think in this case, the film plays it up more by having Natasha. I know that you haven't seen the movie except for the one time B. But in the film, Darcy is dating a lawyer.
The American lawyer.
With him. Daniel is dating the American stick figure.
Right.
And
right.
Darcy is dating Natasha,
yes.
the super rich, polished, I guess like Cambridge educated barrister who works with him, who wants the symbolism of Mark. And so they get played off of each other. The movie does that. The book, however, does not, which I can appreciate because they don't need to play off one woman against another in order to show why one is better than the other. But I think it plays back on, and I could just be jumping to conclusions, Fielding doing the thing where Mark is Darcy of Pride and Prejudice, and that one time where he's like, I would not like a lady unless she had all these accomplishments. So it's kind of playing off of that, where Bridget does not have all the accomplishments. She went to I don't know what it's called in England. I know it's not a public school. It's the opposite of a public school, which is a public school to us. It's the school where the commoners go, not the rich kids.
I'm trying to think of the
name. She went to like a regular college that you don't pay for, as opposed to him going, I think, to Cambridge. The university she goes to is poor people's university, as opposed to Mark's rich man's university. So she is very different from the women he does associate with, because he is a lot higher class than she is. It can be negative. It can be a backhanded compliment. I think in this case, it's playing off of that Pride and Prejudice / Bridget Jones thing with Darcy being Darcy, but not Darcy also.
I would love to know how much, when Helen Fielding started writing this, she consciously decided that it was going to be a play on Pride and Prejudice. Did she think that she was going to loosely follow it?
I did some background reading, and I don't 100% remember exactly. I think she wrote it following, or at least the book following the mini-series. I almost called it the mini-sode. Following the mini-series, it was intended to play off of that.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I don't know if beat for beat she was trying to match it up, but the intent was, this is a loose Pride and Prejudice story.
I don't know why that jump-started this other thought in my head, but another anti-feminist rant. I enjoy that Bridget had sex and liked having sex and thought about having sex. I feel like that's something that's very normal. It's a normal part of life, part of dating, part of being a single 30-something woman. And I enjoyed that was something that her friends didn't shame her about. No one said, oh, you shouldn't be doing it. Even her parents kind of got into it and were like, what?
Yeah, there's nothing scandalous about her having a sex life. I think the American comparison to this is probably Sex and the City, but even then there's like a scandal. about being like super sexually active or something. So.
And I was wondering, because you said this came out in
95,
and Sex and the City premiered after that. I think it was 98 to 2003. So I was wondering how much Sex and the City owed to, I know is based on Candace Bushnell's series. I wonder how much Candace Bushnell owed to Helen Fielding. They were both journalists writing serials, and how much that influenced her, because Sex and the City is a really big...
I know that in the publishing industry, things will follow on the heels of others, as you've seen when like one vampire novel does well, all of them start getting published. So Bridget Jones doing well may have very well paved the way for somebody like Candace Bushnell to publish her book. But I'm totally maybe making this up, so don't quote me on that. So I think we've established that the ranting will not be as ranty as I feared, hoped. So let's go into Catharsis Corner, where we can air our grievances in other ways.
Can I go?
Go ahead, do it.
I have something. I didn't think this was a feminist rant. I saved it for here. One of the things that drove me crazy about this, and I know it's the whole point of the story, but I cannot get it when a woman does not understand how horrible a man is. He's been horrible to her at the beginning, and then she thinks that he's going to change. She thinks that she's going to change him, or that he's going to have an epiphany. I understand, yes, Bridget is one of the things that makes me want to shake you and makes you realistic. I was just like, Bridget, Daniel might be really cute, he might have a nice butt or whatever it is, but he's treated you like dirt already. Like, why do you think that it's going to change later? So that's one of the things about Bridget. I don't care that she can't figure out how to stop smoking, or that she can't figure out how to talk back to her mother. It's just, come on, why can't you realize that he's no good for you?
Because she has to stop dating emotional you-know-what's.
I know, but like, that was your resolution.
That's a resolution.
So why didn't you see that he was one of those? Or why couldn't you stop yourself?
I have to agree, it is one of the more exasperating things for me about this story. Obviously, our Wickham, he's supposed to be a horrible person. He is still in all the books. He's still present throughout all the stories, but in a different way.
Oh my gosh, does she end up with him when Darcy dies?
No,
Okay.
she doesn't. But he remains as the weird friend who will constantly pop back up, because they do actually remain friends. They realize they're okay as friends, just like they should never date each other. But there are women who will fall into this, so I do think it's a realistic portrayal as well. Not everyone's perfect. I think some of that is the whole idea in the book, that at the end, she didn't really change very many of her resolutions. It's just that she was really set on all these things. The one thing she finally gives up on is dating these kinds of guys.
For now. There was that, and then there was the fact that I actually didn't understand, not a lot of the references, but it was written in the 90s, and I'm not British, and I don't live in London, nor have I ever. There were a couple of times where I stopped and I was like, do I want to look it up? Not really, because I didn't want to be taken out of the story. But it was something that sometimes bothered me enough for me to think about it, that I didn't understand the references.
You did look up the picture, though, I remember you saying, before the recording.
Oh, I did, but that was just because I wanted to be extra. Yes. And
you did not show me, though. Show me the picture.
Oh, okay. We're going to take a short break. Pause.
I don't know how you interpret this facial expression that I have into words.
We are back, and B is horrified at the photo that I dug up when Bridget says that she looked up the guy and the girl who were playing Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy in the miniseries, and it's Colin Firth and Jennifer Ale. I didn't actually know that they had dated in real life.
I didn't either.
And I was so shocked at the idea of Colin Firth with a mustache that I had to research that, and I did, and we will share it with you, listeners. It's atrocious.
Can we say it's a pornstache?
That's what I thought. It looks like a 1970s pornstache. I don't understand how someone could do that to themselves, let alone how someone in acting, whose job is appearances, do that to themselves voluntarily. It wasn't for a role or anything.
It wasn't?
No.
I don't think this is one of Colin Firth's greater moments.
So, Colin Firth, I love your work, if you ever happen to hear this, but that look, horrible, and I'm sorry that I'm going to share it, but if I had to suffer, everyone else will suffer with me.
I actually, reading it again this time, had a similar experience to Ashley. Not that I didn't know the references, but just being struck by how very 90s the book felt at this point in time. Obviously, I know things have changed, but boy, have they changed. Not just in the way that people interact with each other, but definitely like the references, the things that they talk about. The fact that, as Bea mentioned in her synopsis, Bridget has a flat in London. That's not possible now for somebody working in publishing. There's just a lot that has changed, both economically, socially, politically, and it's really obvious reading the book because it was originally a newspaper story, so there is a lot of reference to pop culture icons, news, major events around the world, just all the stuff that was happening in the 90s. And A few years ago, when I was working on my master's, I remember taking this one class on YA Lit, and one of the books I read was written in the early 90s, at that point also a bit dated, and it also had a lot of pop culture references. And I had a conversation with my professor about how people, especially born well after the 90s, might react to this. So reading Bridget, I had a similar response around, I don't know how somebody maybe born in the early 2000s would react to this and make sense of the pop culture references without having to look them up. But if Rainbow Rowell can write books set in the 80s and 90s and call it historical fiction, I think it can survive.
I think it's a whole separate conversation. Books in the 80s and 90s should not be considered historical fiction. Something within my living memory is not historical.
I've had moments where I've seen young people encounter like a cassette tape and be like, what is this thing? The past is all history to them now. So another thing that I wanted to mention, and it's something that I just thought of right before we started recording, and it was, there's one scene where Perpetua is talking about the Pride and Prejudice adaptation, and she's doing her usual snobbery and saying that people should not be allowed to watch the film until they have proved that they have read the book.
Oh, that annoyed me so much.
And so, yeah, exactly. So that came at me and I was like, Bridget, you tear her down. She is wrong. So that's not kind of a catharsis, but just like, it was something that, as I was reading it, I was like, oh, I hate those people. Don't be those people. That is my catharsis. So that is all I have to cathart. If B has anything.
Look at my hands. Do you see the kid gloves I'm wearing? Aren't they nice kid gloves?
Very shiny.
Thank
neat.
you. So I'm going to be milder than I otherwise would if I did not know how much this meant to you, Grisel.
You already told me you laughed. You made my day.
That one time.
That one time, that is all I needed.
I am, however, going to share my reading experience. I was so fed up with everyone in this book by the halfway point that I took not one, but two book overlays, to use the phrase Ashley coined last episode. And it was meant to be only one, but the first book was The Bookshop by Penelope Fitzgerald, and that ended being far too depressing. So I read The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton right after, because nothing cheers me up like a good Agatha Christie-style murder with a supernatural twist, and that one was excellent, except, and this is why I'm bringing it up, it had a last-minute fridging. So Evelyn Hardcastle both energized me enough to go back to Bridget Jones, and it also made me appreciate the fact that precisely 0 women died in this book herself, and especially not for the purpose of producing man pain. So I'm going to give credit where credit's due instead of providing catharsis this time. I'm going to say well done in the whole not fridging anyone area, Bridget Jones, and a half sock bonus to you, and a half sock deduction to Evelyn Hardcastle accordingly. If I never read or watch anything again in which a woman dies solely to motivate a man, it will be too soon.
So with that, I think I am almost afraid to ask. Sock ratings? Half sock? Is that more than 0 socks?
I'm very shocked that Bridget will be in the positive sock ratings. I thought it was going to be squarely at the 0 sock ratings.
We even talked about imaginary numbers.
Right, I know.
Again, kid gloves. I'm grading on a curve here.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, ready?
Am I ever?
I'm going to give it 1 half sock for not fridging anyone, like I said, and I'm going to give it another half sock for the description of shipping, which made me laugh, like I said as well. So that's a grand total of 1 sock.
That sock is glorious.
But it comes with a caveat. Don't you ever make me read or watch anything about these people ever again.
I won't. I promise.
I will also say that I really appreciated the Mary Poppins reference at the beginning of the book, because that means that all their works have had references to future works so far this autumn.
Oh, good point. I hadn't realized that.
It was on purpose. I had a reason for pushing so hard. Also because it's for Christmas, and there's Christmas all over this book.
I'm still in shock that it had a positive sock rating.
That's my Christmas present to you.
Thank you. I will carry this with me.
That needs to be the next edition of Bridget Jones when it's published. Given 1 sock by B of the Bluestocking Circle.
You're welcome, Ms. Fielding.
I'm going to give it more than 1 sock. I'm going to give it 4 socks.
No, you're not.
What?
Yes.
No.
Because this is something that I would read again.
What?
I laughed out loud. My boyfriend actually came in because I was in the second
all
bedroom.
I wanted people to laugh, really.
And he was like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm reading Bridget Jones. And it was funny because I was laughing out loud at some of it. I think it's a combination of, I thought the writing was witty, especially since you said it was a satire.
It's satire.
I wasn't going in reading it as this is supposed to be the ideal person to aspire to. Mm-hmm. It's a satire of everything that goes on.
Yeah, I think if you go into it thinking that this is like literary fiction or that you're supposed to find an ideal character, you're going to be horribly disappointed.
Right. So I think I had the right mindset for it. I had my expectations.
I knew she was a mess going in.
Tweets.
I had the right mindset.
But I enjoyed that she was a mess because I think a lot like Grisel, how you were saying that you see yourself sometimes in her. I'm
pretty messy.
I have those swings where sometimes I'm like, oh, I am so beautiful and amazing. I am a woman. Hear me roar. And I have those times where I'm like, ugh, I am hideous. Let me crawl into a hole and just like never see anyone again. And sometimes I'm like, yes, I have a great job and I like my job and I'm okay at it. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know how to spell my name. Why is anyone paying me to do anything? So
This explains it. I think I'm practically perfect in every way, so I could not relate at all.
I think that's the thing.
I just really related to Bridget going,
Practically perfect people.
I call myself a hot mess. I never thought I was practically perfect. I wish I could be practically perfect. So I really enjoyed it, and I would read it again, which was why my 3 sock ratings are when I like something, 4s are when I would read it again, and I would read it again. I'm actually considering asking for it for Christmas because I checked it out because I wasn't sure if I could commit, and I think I actually want to own it. So I'm going to give it a 4.
That is an excellent thing. I am so happy.
I would hereby like to announce my resignation from the Bluestocking circle.
We've ruined her. I will actually say that I myself give it a 4 because while it is one of my favorites, I know that it is not without its problems. And I can admit that there are some shady things happening in this book, and the 90s were strange times, but I still also enjoy it, and every time I read it, I find myself laughing at stuff that I'd forgotten, and it's all about the laughter for me with this book. It's a comedy that I can turn to whenever I'm a little bit down, and I will surely come out a little bit happier for it. Okay, so now that we have settled all that, let us go on to the reading recommendations. And I will start by saying that Bridget, as I already mentioned, led me on a mad quest to find all the comedy diaries. So I will recommend the Georgia Nicholson books by Louise Renison, which are hilarious and absurdly raunchy adventures of a teenage British girl who deals with boys, mad friends, and an embarrassingly silly family, all while navigating the politics of school and puberty, and, which was my first choice for this episode, just saying, of course.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it was.
This was your first choice, Bridget Jones. And then when I said no to Bridget Jones, that was your second choice. And you went back to Bridget Jones.
But then you didn't want it, so I went back.
The kid gloves.
Anyhow, it was an option that was refused. But other than that, I will recommend the sequels, Bridget Jones, The Edge of Reason, and Mad About the Boy. As I said, I met Helen Fielding after the release of Mad About the Boy, and it continues to be one of my favorite literary moments. So it's a very good sequel, despite things that happen. And just to round it off, Pride and Prejudice, because it was Bridget that led me to Jane.
I'm pretty sure everyone hearing this has read Pride and Prejudice.
You never know, there's always that one person out there.
It's true.
In honor of Bridget Jones, we've messed up our reading recs order, and as a newbie, I will go second and not last. My reading recommendation is The Princess Diaries by Meg Cabot, fairly obvious choice. If you've only seen the Disney movie, you're in for a surprise because the book is much more biting than the movie, with frank, overtly feminist discussions about handling adolescence, adulthood, relationships, and careers as a young woman. Both The Princess Diaries and Bridget Jones's Diary are, no surprise there, written in diary format, and like Bridget, Mia is a privileged and self-absorbed young woman, but unlike Bridget, she is trying to make the world a better place in her own way. The book is the first in a series that follows Mia from her first year of high school to her adulthood and marriage, and I don't like all of them, but the first one is worth a read, I think. If you want to forgo the high school drama and go straight to a more mature Mia, relatively speaking, I think you can safely skip to the most recent book in the series, Royal Wedding, which catches up with Mia in her 20s. And I will note that as much as I liked the book series in high school, I liked the movie even more. So despite all the differences and the Disneyfication I just mentioned, I do recommend watching it if you haven't, although you can safely skip the sequel. If you thought Bridget was your fictional equivalent as a teenager, Grisel, I used to think movie Mia was mine.
I think that's a very good recommendation, and I second The Princess Diaries.
And I will also extend an olive branch. I will recommend a 90s rom-com, my personal favorite, While You Were Sleeping, based on the really creepy premise of what if someone lied about being the fiancé of a comatose guy she had a crush on, then met his family in the hospital and fell in love with his brother, but it all works out with no hard feelings in the end because the star is Sandra Bullock at her peak sweetheart period and you just can't hate her. It's a Christmas movie, like Bridget Jones's Diary, so if you're hearing this episode when we release it in December, it's the perfect time for a watch or a rewatch.
I have actually never seen that movie, so maybe I'll watch it. And maybe not. I don't know. We are torn between two feelings here.
I think as we've safely established with this episode and the Mary Poppins episode, we are very different people. I actually hate While You Were Sleeping. You admit that the premise is a little creepy.
Super creepy.
I just couldn't get past it.
But could you actually watch it?
Yeah, I watched it. I hated the whole thing. I was like, she's horrible. The brother's horrible. The only person not horrible is the guy in the coma because
so it was
he's
your
in a coma.
Bridget
He's
Jones.
the worst one of all.
So that was like B's reaction to Bridget Jones was your reaction to While You Were Sleeping.
I think it might be funny to have you watch it and see on which end of the spectrum you fall, because we have the both ends
the
very
challenge
clearly.
for the next mini-sode?
Mini-sode follow-up,
Okay,
yes.
I will do my homework.
And it features 2 Bluestocking Circle alumni, Spaceballs and Mary Poppins.
Does it?
Oh, yeah! Yeah, you're right. Okay, tie-ins.
Okay.
I will say, my olive branch, after saying that, is that I'm going to third the recommendation for The Princess Diaries. I did trail off somewhere around the 7th or 8th book.
Oh, me too. I left when Mia and Michael broke up.
I can't believe I actually got all the way to the end and neither of you two did.
I was not happy with the Michael Mia nonsense. But they are really great books. And I'm also going to recommend something by Meg Cabot. Size 12 is Not Fat is the name of the book. And it's the first in a series of books starring Heather Wells, who is a former pop star turned college resident hall assistant director. It's very important that you call her a resident hall assistant director and not a dorm. A dorm does not foster a sense of warmth and unity amongst the college students. The supporting cast of characters is just as zany and colorful and memorable as you find in Bridget Jones. It's not in a diary format, but I think that Heather's self-deprecating narration reminds me a lot of Bridget's style of thought.
Having read it, I can agree. I think the overall takeaway, though, is go read The Princess Diaries.
Yes.
Yes.
That I can agree with.
That concludes this episode of the Bluestocking Circle podcast. For the show notes, visit thebluestockingcircle.com. Find us on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, Pinterest, and pretty much everywhere at BlueSockCircle. That's Blue, S-O-X, Circle. Email us at thebluestockingcircle@gmail.com and join the conversation. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify, so please rate, review, and subscribe to help us grow.
Cheers! Thank goodness it's over.
But you were so good throughout the whole thing.
Was on my best behavior.
Or do you mean the goodness it's over?
Don't start her. Don't get her started.